Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, we're going to talk about automated work zone speed enforcement. This is an important subject given all the construction that's going on. But first, a couple of reporters that cover state politics are going to join me, and we'll talk about the effects of the recently held primary and some important issues before the Pennsylvania legislature. And we'll get to all of that after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, let's get to it. We got a number of important topics. We have Stephen Caruso. He's the Capitol reporter with Spotlight PA, and John Cole, he's a reporter with PA Capitol Star. Did I get that right, gentlemen?
Yes, you did.
That's right, I'm working on it. All right, John Cole, I'm going to start with you. We had an important primary, and there's some big effects that every one of us should be aware of about that primary. Give me a couple of them.
Absolutely. So now the primary election is in the rearview mirror, but of course there were big results for U.S. Senate. We now know that it'll be Senator Bob Casey, the Democrat, seeking a fourth term in office. He was unopposed. Now he is looking forward to the general election. He will be facing Republican Dave McCormick. This is his second time running for U.S. Senate. McCormick ran in 2022, finished in second place behind Republican Mehmet Oz by less than 1,000 votes, a rather close contested
And he didn't
primary.
appeal.
Yes, correct. That was a very close race, but Oz ended up getting the nomination in 2022. This time, McCormick was unopposed for the Republican Party primary, so those two will be facing off in the general election.
This is going to be nationally watched. I mean, you read about it, you see it on TV, you listen to it on radio. I mean, this is a huge national contest, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the Senate's close, the U.S. Senate's closely divided,
right.
And obviously we're coming into a presidential election that juices people's attention. Though I should say turnout was pretty low in the primary this time because a lot of these top ticket races really weren't contested. I mean, neither McCormick or Casey had opponents on the ballot. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are only facing token opposition for the nomination. So I think a lot of people who showed up just were kind of doing it out of obligation. I know looking forward, what everyone's focused on is how do we make sure people come out in November.
4 or 5 states are going to determine control of the Senate. This race in the state of Pennsylvania is going to be, if not the most watched, certainly one of the most watched Senate elections in the country. President Biden, of course, comes from neighboring Delaware. He virtually lived here when he was a U.S. Senator, not in Delaware. He lived in Delaware, but you get my point. And so we're going to be heavily trafficked, aren't we?
There's no question about it. And I know it's just the beginning of May now, but we've seen both Donald Trump and Joe Biden visit the state on numerous occasions thus far. So, and again, mind you, we are months and months away from the general election, so it's pretty evident that both campaigns are heavily invested in Pennsylvania. And to your point about the Senate race, really, again, how it could determine who will ultimately have control of the U.S. Senate next year. I mean, both sides of the aisle are saying it. Another development that is interesting that is worth monitoring is that, now again, I know the primary just passed, but last week on Thursday, U.S. Senator Bob Casey's campaign sent out a press release saying they had agreed to 3 debates for the general election.
Correct.
Shortly after that, McCormick's campaign responded saying they will participate in that. We don't have the finalized details of exactly when.
When the 3 will,
But they did agree to participate in 3 debates.
Well, you almost have to. I mean, you can't run for the United States Senate in a situation such as this and not agree to a debate, can you?
I mean, I think statewide, a lot of people have been eskewing debates. I mean, last year, John Fetterman and Dr. Oz debated just once. There was no debate in the gubernatorial race. I believe, even in statewide primaries, debates seem to be coming out modded. Maybe you get all the candidates on stage once or twice, but I mean, it just seems like it's one of those things that's falling to the wayside in politics in 2024 is the idea of you get the candidates on stage and have them answer questions from the press.
And want to add just one note on that is that, so like you said, Stephen, in 2022, Oz and Fetterman only faced off once. The last time Casey was on the ballot was 2018. He faced Republican Lou Barletta, a former congressman. they debated twice. Once in Pittsburgh, once in Philly. For what Casey and McCormick have said they've agreed to 3 debates, one in Pittsburgh, one in Harrisburg, and one in Philly. So you're talking about 3 different regions of the Commonwealth.
They're going to have three debates in 3 areas of the state that get a lot of media coverage, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, if we're talking, and you know what's interesting on that note is that although Philadelphia may have the reputation of being, the biggest Democratic city in the state, which it is, the Philadelphia media market also encompasses the Philly suburbs, mind you.
Absolutely.
And these voters, sure, maybe they've leaned left, but they're not necessarily voting Democrat down ballot all the way. So, and the same thing, let's say in the Pittsburgh media market, Allegheny County votes blue. However, surrounding counties such as Washington County, Westmoreland, et cetera, these are more conservative-leaning counties. So the media market is important to know that they're going to reach a lot of voters.
We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I'm going to turn to you. We're going to talk about issues before the Pennsylvania legislature after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, I'm talking to Steve Caruso and John Cole. They are reporters. They cover a lot of important matters, issues before the Pennsylvania legislature. All right, Stephen, before I want to get into issues before the legislature, but there's another aspect to the primary you want to mention.
Well, it's just, as we're talking about that top of the ticket races, at the bottom of the ballot, legislative elections are being held. All 203 state house reps and half of the Pennsylvania Senate were up. And there were some interesting results, particularly in the state house. Brian Cutler, the House Minority Leader, beat a challenge from his right, from Dave Nisley, a local pastor. And Cutler, there was a lot of chatter beforehand that was a race to watch. And it ended up being closer than his last primary, but he held on. And I think it's just emblematic of the fact that, primaries on legislative leaders are increasingly becoming a dynamic. I've seen top leaders be challenged, particularly in the Republican Party, pretty much every year since 2020. And that adds an extra dynamic as we head into budget season, the state's budget.
And there may be pressure on the other party to go after the leader for obvious reasons.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the legislative races are becoming extremely contested throughout the year. In particular, I mean, looking at in the House, it's 102, 101. So with that dynamic at play,
could it get any closer?
I mean,
except tied.
Maybe they'll have it independent. I mean, that's what they tried. But that's to say, I'm definitely always watching that dynamic of how does the fear of a primary or just the threat of a primary influence people as they vote.
And one thing I think is also worth noting, so again, like Stephen mentioned, Representative Cutler did beat his primary challenge. However, there were a few incumbents that did lose their primary challenges that are worth mentioning. On the Republican side of the aisle, I believe it's out, was it in Blair County? I think
yes.
Representative Jim Gregory lost a primary challenger to, I believe he was to the right of him as well, right?
Yeah, Scott Barger, local pastor as well.
Yeah, and then in Philadelphia, you have Representative Kevin Boyle loses primary challenger to
All right, what do we have in the next couple of weeks have to watch in the state legislature?
Well, it's going to
with Governor Shapiro.
We're coming into budget season, so that's the state budget spending documents due June 30th. So leading up to that, it's going to be a lot of intense negotiations. The other thing to keep an eye on is potentially election reform. I feel like this is a broken record. I feel like you probably had reporters come on this show and talk about how Pennsylvania counties need time to count mail-in ballots before the election, probably since 2020. But a bill passed the House along party lines this week to give counties 7 days of that. The counties support it. Senate Republicans have been clear they only will do that if it's tied to constitutional voter ID. This is the same debate we've been having, forever, at least what it feels like in the Capitol. So I don't know if that can get done, but that's definitely also something to keep an eye on because, deals don't happen in Harrisburg until all of a sudden they do happen, and we're covering one at the last minute. So that's definitely something I'm watching.
And this is an election year. That adds another another element to it, doesn't
Absolutely.
it?
I think, their votes are always under the microscope. However, in an election year, even more so,
Right.
An elected official who is in, let's say, a battleground seat, every vote they take, they know if they vote against their party or on a controversial issue, that very well could be used against them, whether it be a mail advertisement or a television or digital advertisement. So certainly all these votes are under the microscope in an election year.
Yeah. Well, what's also fascinating is some governors have had bitterness between themselves and the legislature. Governor Shapiro seems to stay removed from much of the day-to-day activities in the legislature.
Yeah, his administration usually, I mean, I think they're active in the legislative process in terms of giving positions and stuff, but they don't often comment to the press on the day-to-day activities. Shapiro usually just says, he expects the legislature to get to work. And this has been the first time we've had a split legislature with this House being Democratic and the Senate being Republican since the late 2010s under Governor Rendell. So, I've sometimes heard that folks who want to see Shapiro be more involved going and whipping votes, they're taking the choice to sort of, stay let the legislature do their job. I think it's a hard choice because Governor Wolf would come out really early on proposals and say what he wanted, what he didn't. And I think they're maybe trying to take the opposite tack.
All right, look, I want to thank you for coming in for this important update. All right, we all drive in them at some point, automated work zone. Let's talk about the enforcement there and some other activities that go on in these work zone areas.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, it happens to all of us. We end up driving into an automated work zone, whether we want to be in one or not. Joining me to talk about the effects of these automated work zone enforcement programs is Bob Latham. He's the Executive Vice President of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. Bob, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you today.
I tell you, you read just recently where workers were struck and killed on a highway outside of Harrisburg.
Well, that's correct. And unfortunately, almost all of the projects that we do right now on roadways are done under traffic. So it's a very dangerous situation. And in many cases like this, where they're a sort of a maintenance type operation and not a big project, you can't have concrete barrier and that sort of thing. So the only thing separating the workers from traffic are maybe some cones. And in this case, there was one attenuator truck that unfortunately the result of this accident was the attenuator truck didn't save these folks. It was primarily due to either distracted driving or unsafe driving, and we're trying to get people to slow down in highway work zones. The irony of this is we do publicize it, and we have this occurred during something we call National Work Zone Safety Awareness Week. So it was a real tragedy.
Are work zones, I've noticed, it looks like there's a significant increase in the number of them going on right now in the state.
Well, we're into the season and again, we're doing repaving, rehabilitation work for the most part, and you really can't put up a concrete barrier on those. We do have some major projects going on around the state now as a result of past funding bills. We're seeing some expansion work on 83 here in Dauphin County. We have a big I-95 project down in Philadelphia, which is really going to be amazing. We're actually capping I-95 and putting a park on top of that over at Penn's Landing, and some others. But again, the major part of our work is bridge rehabilitation and kind of keeping the system together, and that's dangerous work, and unfortunately it was fatal for those folks. So we're asking people to slow down. You mentioned automated work zone speed enforcement at the top of the show. Governor Shapiro did sign legislation that makes that permanent, and we're going to be expanding the use of those and actually providing better signage, better warning, so that motorists understand that when you enter a highway work zone with a camera system, you will get fined if you're 11 miles over the speed limit.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a large road and highway system in Pennsylvania. It's a very complicated state. Again, you and I have chatted about this over many years. We're a complicated state when it comes to roads and highways.
Well, absolutely. Like you said, many times we've talked about the fact that the PennDOT's system is bigger than New York, New England combined in terms of road mileage. We have a geography.
That's amazing, by the way. I want that to sink in.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Think about all of New England plus New York, and we have more road miles that PennDOT has to maintain than those states in that region. We also have a lot of bridges, 26,000 bridges in the state of Pennsylvania.
Is that all?
Got a lot of rivers. We got a lot of mountains, a lot of rivers. We're a freeze-thaw area, and that wreaks havoc on concrete and steel.
Yeah.
We fixed a lot of bridges and roads as a result of funding about 10 years ago, but now that's sort of running out, and now we have a wave of aging bridges that are coming online that are going to need to be fixed, and we're a little bit short on funding that we need to find.
When we come back, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want you to talk more about the enforcement program,
Certainly.
how it works, and then we can get into some of the major projects that are underway.
Certainly.
Back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
All right, well, you could be driving in the state of Pennsylvania and end up in an automated work zone, and there's a speed enforcement program there. Bob Latham, what's that?
Okay, so everybody knows when you're driving along and you see signs ahead that say, work zone ahead, slow down. The speed limit is usually reduced. And prior to legislation that was passed, you had to have a law enforcement officer there to enforce the speed limit. Now we've got legislation that literally sets up a system. We have a camera in the work zone that can take a picture of the license plate and also record the speed. Now, when a motorist comes into one of these work zones, there will be big, bright orange and yellow signs with a picture of a camera that says "Photo Enforced." You can't miss it. As a matter of fact, we're going to make them even bigger as a result of some of the discussions with the General Assembly, which is fine. So you will know when you're moving into one of these things. And if you're over the speed limit, actually, if you're 12 miles an hour over the speed limit, you have a grace period. You have a grace amount of 11 miles an hour. And if you're over that, if you're really speeding through that work zone, being unsafe, putting workers' lives and your own life in jeopardy, you are going to get a ticket, a fine. It's going to be sent to your house for payment. And
there's a lot more highway and bridge work going on in this state, right?
Absolutely. And as we've discussed, it's always under traffic. There's almost no highway projects today that are done without traffic going by it. So we really urge people to slow down. Most of the accidents, most of the injuries, and most of the deaths are not even highway workers. They're motorists themselves. So it's for the safety of you and those driving around you. But of course, near and dear to our hearts,
talking about
sure
that,
the workers are safe.
I'm going to read what you've written. Nearly 2/3 are older than 50 years old, and those 85% are in fair or poor condition, meaning they need repairs or weight restrictions.
That's great. There's the bridge inventory that we have. So a couple of things on that. So everybody thinks, I think there's a mindset that we got all this money from the federal government in order to fund our roads. While there was a big program a couple of years ago, you have to be on the interstate system in order to be eligible for that. We have an aging bridge inventory now. We fixed a lot of them with the prior funding bill. We fixed a lot of them, but now we have older ones coming online that need to be fixed, and that's that statistic that 85% of those old ones need to be fixed. The other thing that needs to be pointed out is a lot of our lesser driven roads and the non-interstates, the non-U.S. routes, are not eligible for that federal funding. So we're seeing a lot of rural roads and a lot of more local but PennDOT maintained roads that are starting to fall apart, and they need additional funding.
As you talk about money, we also have a fairly high gas tax in the state of Pennsylvania. So raising that's not
raising our
likely to
gas
happen.
tax is pretty much politically out of the question right now. And I just want to remind folks, we have a high gas tax, but we have very low registration fee and a very low license fee compared to other states. So we took the approach that getting on the system by having a driver's license or registering your car is inexpensive relative to other states, but the more you drive, the more you pay. But that puts us, like you said, we have a high gas tax. So we're not going to be able to raise that, particularly with the price of gas that's being driven by the international market. We are continuing to phase out the money that is going from the highway fund to the state police budget. That's starting to be ratcheted down. That's positive. We don't have any fee on electric vehicles right now.
No fee.
No fee for owning an electric vehicle.
Is that likely to
35
change?
states
Is that likely to change?
It's under consideration. It's been under consideration for a number of years. We'd like to see that change, and then we have a whole myriad of other types of programs that need to be funded as well. We have small airports that are lacking money. We have multimodal projects that are very popular among state and local officials that are sort of up against it in the amount of funding that we can do there as well. So the governor has proposed a transit funding injection of state funds, which is fine and should happen. But we've always done more of a multimodal approach here in Pennsylvania. So we would suggest that it's transit, it's roads, it's aviation, and it's local roads.
We have about a minute left. Should we permit counties to raise funds for transportation projects?
Yes, particularly in the southeast and other counties, they're asking for the ability to raise money for transportation projects. One of the things that we could offer is some sort of a match system. If we had some additional money at the state level, they could match it with that. Because the counties and the municipalities have as many or more miles of roads in the Commonwealth than actually PennDOT maintains as well. We always say PennDOT's got a huge system, which we talked about earlier here today, but the local roads are actually more than that.
All right, thanks for the update. This is a very important subject. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.